I want to talk to you about a socio-ecological approach to autism. And I'm trying to find the right mechanism. Why autism? You'll see things coming on stage, and I'll explain why in a minute. Why autism? Because it's one of the most discussed, diagnosed psychiatric conditions in the world, and because I've studied it myself extensively as a theorist and as a practitioner. I've worked in different contexts with people with autism, and because I am an autistic person myself. Having that out in the open, that's why you see in the corner people struggling with getting my laptop to work, because I am a visual thinker and the monitors don't work. Because I have autism, I will overwhelm you with everything I say being visualized. So you don't even have to listen to me. I support you visual thinkers in writing out everything. And if it can't be written out, I use images. Again, I will overload. I'm going slow now, but just like the world feels to me, I'll make you feel the up-tempo pace and what it's like to live with autism. So if he keeps struggling, I keep struggling. But what I want to do is bring autism back to where it belongs, to its actual subject. And for me, it takes to be a theorist, an autistic person, and a practitioner. So the theory, I won't bore you too much. Autism exists for about 75 years now, but still, load of questions. When we look at the spending and the research on autism, we see that in the US alone, federal and private funding for autism is around $400 million. And in the UK, for instance, 50% of the research grants go to studying the biology of autism, autistic brains, and cognition. The 75 years of history of autism have also given us an increase in numbers of people diagnosed. I have to control 2 clickers, so excuse me if I go berserk with the coordination. In 1967, the prevalence, so the number of people diagnosed, was 1 in 2,500. A bit later, it was 1 in 68. And now, some claim it's 1 in 25. So look around you and start counting, because 1 in every row, need I say no more? So it seems we're stuck with a bit of an epidemic. We have also seen an increase in complexity. So what that means is, for autism, all we have to do is just simply solve the puzzle, is crack the code, explain its enigma, and we are there. And the enigma we need to explain is the neurobiological enigma. And what neurobiological means, it means that it is located in the brain. It's something physical, so it's in the body. And we can observe autism, we can measure autism, and we speak of it as being a natural condition because people with autism are born this way and they will die this way. The spectrum disorder. The spectrum means it has a multitude of genes involved. General consensus now is between 192 and 244 genes involved. And it has a multitude of causes attached. And autism manifests itself in different traits, different symptoms, some say. Some call it different flavors. I call it behaviors. And a disorder means it's not the optimal condition. There is something out of order, something dysfunctional, but to know that, we have to set it off against a norm. And that norm, in our society, we call normality. Or some people with autism call it being neurotypical. So to be or not to be autistic, you have to comply with all the traits listed for autism. All the traits can be measured inside the brain and the body, and you have to behave like a typical autist. So we have created something like a super autist, haven't we? But what if you are like me? You do not like dinosaurs, or you don't like trains, and you do like cuddling, or social interaction with a hiccup once in a while. Or what if you have, as Yavanna said in the introduction, you have one of those traits that is not even listed in a definition of autism. I'm synesthetic. What that means is that my senses get intertwined. So, I think we're stuck with a problem. And yes, autism really has some problems. For one, it's ever-changing diagnosis through history, and it has a multitude of causes attached to it, a multitude of underlying mechanisms attached to it, and moreover, the diagnostical process itself. It seems a bit like working with a sorting hat. According to the symptoms you show, or the behavior you show, you get classified. And in the end, it's all a question whether you are out or out. So on the neurobiological side, where we speak of things being neurobiological, we say it is encompassed in a medical model. Then we see autism as a mental illness as opposed to mental health. And we focus on the complex interaction between the biological and the psychological, and of course, the dysfunction. So one can have the condition of autism without actually being ill. One can have a few symptoms without actually having full-blown autism. In medicine, you can compare it with having the HIV virus and having full-blown AIDS. So what that means when you think of autism from a medical model is we have to bring the body back into its original order. And I don't know how this happens. So we have to bring the body back into its original condition. We have to restore it. I kind of attract Murphy. He's my best friend. It's been from this morning on. So I'm used to it, I'll talk you through it, and no worries. Seems like we autistic people can cope with change very well, can't we? So just like with other illnesses, the flu, etc., autism needs to be treated and needs to be cured. So if anyone in the presentation can find the one with my picture and the question marks, then we're back on track. So me, for one, I don't want to be cured for traits that make me me. I like my wit, I like my intelligence, I like my thinking and my hearing colors. My synesthesia gives me loads of fun. But what I do like is to be able to function more efficiently in society, do groceries, have less social anxiety. I would want not to be lost for words sometimes and not have to suffer with 2 clickers anymore. So I'm going to lay one on the side. And I want to be a normal, full spectrum person. And the spectrum, when we come to look at it, again, it is something physical. We derive it from physics, which is a linear model. And when we look at the linear model, we see that the secondary colors are not a mix from the primary colors, and each of the color remains separate from the other. What that means for ASD is that all the full colors and flavors can be found in one person, which differs from the next person and from the next person. And moreover, autism changes throughout lifespan. I was very different when I was small. I couldn't have handled this. I would have chucked this from the stage. Believe me. So isn't autism, if we look at it that way, a bit like the normal variance in humans? Or if we say it's linear, can we stack people up one next to another? And shouldn't autism shade off into normalcy? You all know the expression, we're all a bit autistic. And on the other side, does it mean that it shades off into the other conditions mentioned in psychiatric manuals? Because we see a lot of overlap. And when we talk about people, what are we on about? Autistic people, are they indigenous? Are they tribes? Or just a collection of individuals? So all in all, we have a bit of a problem with the boundaries, and yeah, autism is in trouble. The category is vague. It's not clear and distinct from anything else, and the pure biological aspect of autism is its biggest problem. So is it real or not? Believe me, it's rather real, because people with autism, through blogs, autobiographies, through the internet, they keep informing us about their experience of problems in the real world. So, with this information, this we can take into the practices. The epidemic, lots of study has been done about it, with lots of causes, etc. But it wasn't until the parental organizations came into being and advocacy came into being that autism came into popular awareness. And from the moment it came into popular awareness, there was easier access to treatments, etc., which we have lots of, and then all these things had to be published in books. Then we got the autism films, the autism cinemas, you all have seen and heard of. And perhaps the popular awareness is what caused the epidemic. So how about that popular thinking? On the one hand, we have the treatment, but lots of research still has to be done about its effectiveness. And on the other hand, we see people who say we have to celebrate this neurodiversity among us. We should see it as a new category of human difference, because autism is a biological fact, on par with homosexuality, skin pigmentation, etc. It's not pathological, it's just a differently wired brain, though different from the standard brain, but it functions, as you can see, equally well. So, no treatment, all society has to do is just accept it. But that being different plays a big part in the autistic culture. That different being we are creating, it is out there. And if we say different, what do we mean? It's different from what? Aren't we then again creating a new category of human beings? And if we say different and a new category, aren't we as polarizing as psychiatry is in the first place? And if autism really was an evolutionary benefit, then why are people with autism still experiencing problems in this world? And how about the one with a very much younger developmental age than mine? We are on our way to exclusion instead of acceptance. But if we zoom in on this popular practice, we can see lots of solutions coming from the people with autism themselves to have and gain control over their environment. What you see on the screen is a squeeze chute, which is invented by Temple Grandin, and where she gets overwhelmed by stimuli or social interactions, she gets into the machine and she applies deep pressure to herself to calm herself down. This is how she copes with environment. And then we saw it being adopted by the families and even in practitioners' rooms. We see seats hugging people, and then again later on, from that came a commercialization into portable means, and all these means get adopted by the public. So can we use this popular awareness as a means to a solution? And then we get to the actual subject of autism. When treating individuals, it sometimes comes as natural to us. And as we heard in the previous presentation, we do things intuitively. So when we see behavior like it is projected on the right-hand side, somebody covering his ears with his hands, and when we look around and we see a crowded room full of people talking, television playing, loud, we immediately know what to do. The person knows what to do in a crowded room. He covers his ears, which is an adaptive response, and perhaps the people in the room turn down the TV or suggest him to go outside. We just have to use our common sense sometimes. So what we see is, all in all, a dynamic process of one organism adapting to another organism. And we speak of autism's real, I can't get it to move anymore. So when we talk about adaptation, we talk about reacting to one another. And of course, some of the reactions are more adequate than other reactions. Some of the behaviors, the inadequate one, they come when one can't meet up with the expectations of the environment. And what we see as adequate behavior, which we in common language call appropriate behavior, we call this, or we see this as a more healthy reaction. Can you please turn the music down? And healthy is in fact being more than normal. It's a meaningful reaction to the environment. It's being able to adapt to different norms in different contexts. And that requires some flexibility. And although people with autism are not known to be flexible, although at the moment I'm the living proof of flexibility, one could say that creating a rich and meaningful environment, also for people with autism, is something that leads us to well-being. One has to create one in which the individual can be stimulated, can develop, and can flourish, and be successful on its own conditions. So adaptation cuts both ways, because if we come to think of the squeeze machine, as a society, do we think such a machine is appropriate in an office? Or do we think of it as being appropriate when an autistic person plays with his or her saliva? So it's not only society who has to adapt, or the environment. The person with autism has to adapt as well. And as we've seen in the practices, and coming from people with autism, they have already done. And who knows, in future, we can get used to having a squeeze machine in the office. After all, we got used to these strange machines in fitness halls as well. So if we want adequate and flexible adaptation to one another, it's not about society's norms, it's not about imposing the individual's norms, it's not adapting to the autist alone, And it's not to limiting things into clinical practices. Not all the methods, or all the methods we have now, are for the most part, retained to the clinical practice. And it's not we should not limit things to a specific area. As we know, the strongest organism is a bit more resilient. So it's perhaps a bit more easier for the environment to adapt to the person sometimes. But what we have to do is make the person and the environment stronger in real life. And that's the only way we can, in fact, cope with each other's behavior and develop. So it's a very subjective thing, but if we take the subject as a starting point, it causes less distress. And less distress means more opportunities for development. The need of knowing where autism ends and normality begins diminishes. It's the end of a normalization process. The need for validation and diagnosis becomes less prominent because we can put support before the labeling. And the need for explaining all those complex biological and psychological mechanisms diminishes because we can do research and put all the funding of research into ways to support the subjects, which means the people with autism, the environment, society, the practices as well, and we can think about subject-specific funding, not only giving funding to the person with autism to buy all those means, but also to context, schools, society, to invest in a more adapted. And that is what socialization is all about. So how we see autism is how we come to think of autism. And using a label, a diagnosis, or a classification as a justification not to have to adapt is still too frequently in practice. This is what I call autism's biggest excuse. But for me, autism is the best excuse for development. So I thank you very much for your patience, and I wish you all the development you can ever get in your life.